Here's a 2018 Mercedes. We've had it for a few years now. The warranty's gone. We've owned this Mercedes-Benz as well as many Mercedes over the years, well outside of warranty. And there's some strong things you really need to be aware of before you get into it, because it can break you financially. If you want to drive the three-pointed star like this Mercedes-Benz, you can do it. Let's get right into it. I'm going to share all of the ins and outs, so you need to watch this before you buy. Let's get into it now. Life's too short to drive boring cars. I want to introduce you to my 2018 W205 Mercedes-Benz C-Class Coupe. We've loved this car. Now we've had some issues, and I want to share a few of those issues as well. There's a reason you're watching this video. You're debating buying a Mercedes-Benz or some other luxury vehicle. Well, I can tell you right now, Mercedes-Benz is not going to be the cheapest car. It's not going to be the most reliable car. It's probably not going to be the best performing luxury car in the segment. But it does a great collection of bringing it all together. It's innovative, has great technology, and the styling is absolutely amazing with some of these vehicles. There's ergonomics that beat anything that you're finding outside of Mercedes-Benz. Things that just make the car more comfortable, more usable. The technology works, it's dialed in. So there's certain high volume reliability that goes with some of the technology. It's not flaky. You know, like a Jaguar, I love the F-Type, but it had problems with the infotainment and some of the electronics that just never were quite dialed in. That's why likely you're looking at a Mercedes-Benz, but we've had some problems with this. The positive crankcase ventilation valve, that had to be done. Now, fortunately, Mercedes-Benz is warrantying that. But if you think you're out of the woods by buying one of the other brands, think again. A lot of these other manufacturers are also dealing with carbon fouling, direct injection related issues, turbocharging, and PCVs tie all together a complexity now that you're finding that you never had 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. So now with this new technology, Mercedes-Benz doesn't stand alone. We had some flakiness, we had some components, body panels that popped loose. Where's the overall solidity of some of these modern day Benzes? Well, the fact is they're not quite like they used to be. They used to be built like Sherman tanks. Today, they're a little bit flimsier. There's more snap together fittings. They go together nice. There's less screws and everything's hidden, but sometimes the things just break. There's lots of plastic around on these vehicles, under the hood, outside of the vehicle. Well, again, Mercedes-Benz is not unique, and even Lexus is starting to feel the wrath of some of the problem areas, like their twin turbo 3.4 liter V6 that they're starting to see in their LX models. So every brand is starting to feel the pain, and increasing costs are just part of the game when you're buying a luxury car. So according to CarEdge numbers, based on annual service costs for Mercedes-Benz, you can assume year 2 is about $654, usually an oil service, not much more than that. Year 3 is $803, year 4 is $1,002, and the next Mercedes for year 5 you're at around $1,192. By the time you're at year 6, you're at $1,536, then it goes up to $1,692, $1,767, and all the way by the time you're at year 12 of a modern day Mercedes-Benz, you can expect to pay on average about $2,204 for annual service costs. Why does it start to escalate? Well, you start to see brakes, tires, batteries go, and these batteries are expensive. There's all of the other factors. Things start to go like alternators and starters. Those all start to wear out. Fuel injectors can be a problem. Fuel pumps. Those are all potential problem areas. And some of those maintenance costs start going up. Flushing, filters, fluid changes, those all go up. When you have a vehicle like this that's all-wheel drive, you also have transaxles, you have differentials, you have components that you can leave for a couple of years. Transmission maintenance services also start to creep in there. And so your costs start to rise. And those are just maintenance costs. That does exceed the vast majority of vehicles when you consider about a $12,000 incremental cost for about a 10 or 12 year time frame. When you compare that to vehicles like Lexus, Toyota, Hondas, closer to $8,000, $9,000. So while those vehicles aren't cheap over a 10-year time frame, they are a little bit less than your modern day Mercedes-Benz. Some typical failures you're going to find with Mercedes-Benz, if you're thinking about any of the V6 engines, the M272 as a classic example. You know, when Daimler Chrysler sort of got together and became all amalgamated, they got more than amalgamated. They carried some of that toxicity from Daimler and Chrysler. They all kind of blended it together, and they almost made the worst of the both of the brands. The M272 V6, kind of way back in 2000, think all the way up to about and including 2007, balance shaft sprocket issues, catastrophic failures with those vehicles, and that often meant a $4,000 engine out repair. We talk about a lot of other issues, transmission issues. I even had an older generation ML500, and while the engine and gearbox were bulletproof, the problem was the plastics were fragile, the body would rust, And it just wasn't a time in their life when they built some of the best vehicles. Some of those, of course, were manufactured in the US. And once a lot of those manufacturing facilities started to change, we also started to see some of those impacts. These vehicles here, of course, the W205, there's a lot of host of problems. Some people are saying on forums and some engines are getting detonation, creating hold pistons. There's been a small number of people dealing with engine failures with a lot of these vehicles. While the transmissions are fairly stout, there are other issues, again, typically engine related. Other than that, this engine, and I find overall this car fairly durable in terms of the mechanics. It's the plastics, it's the cosmetics that don't seem to hold up all that well. It also tends to spit out codes with some of these features. You get all of these sensors, and all of a sudden you get lane departure, you get light sensors, you get all kinds of different sensors. Parking sensors start failing when you get into extreme weather. A lot of these technology, a lot of electronics seem to be susceptible to extreme weather. Some of it's related to cold weather, low battery voltage. Also, some of it's related to the fact that the dealer actually washed under the hood, and since then likely introduced water into connectors. Since then, exactly to the point where they washed and shampooed the engine, we all of a sudden started having all kinds of weird gremlins. So combination of introducing water under the hood, which clearly is operator error, it's a fragility and too much technology. Also, the extreme weather takes a toll on batteries, and that leads to other electrical gremlins. There's a few other common errors and areas of concern with a lot of these Mercedes-Benz, and I pull up, for example, an E450 transmission oil cooler assembly. You can assume probably in that $450 to $500, $600 to replace parts and labor. Not all that expensive. How about the AMG E63S parking camera? You could expect $2,000 to $2,500 for repairs for that. The GL550, the power mirror switch, you're in that $400 to $500. Again, parts and labor. Some of the parts aren't extraordinarily expensive. Some of them can be, surprisingly. And when you compare that to a Toyota or a Honda and you're doing a full flush, you might only be saving yourself $100 by going with a Toyota. When you look at a vehicle like the C350E airbag sensor, might only be $300 or $400. So some of these numbers don't seem extraordinarily expensive, but yet others can be very expensive. And that's the problem. You don't always know. You can't paint it all with a brush. A lot of these parts are actually made a little better, and many would argue are nicely made, well-crafted parts in some cases don't fail, where lesser models, Kias, Hyundais, might actually catastrophically fail. More things to consider. In the older version of this, the W204, there's problems. The oil pan, they can leak and they can fail. And sometimes there's cases where they absolutely need to be replaced. Guess what? $3,000 repair. Plus, if you step up into a more premium version, get into the E-Class, the S-Class, where a lot of people would argue those are the true Mercedes-Benz, where you really want to start. SL, S-Class, CLS, E-Class. Those are the cars that most would consider true Mercedes-Benz, and some people say the CLAs, GLAs, or price point A-Class cars are also price point cars that are not worth buying. There is a benefit in buying some of this lower end Mercedes though, even though some consider them less refined, less technology, and maybe less Mercedes. But the point is, there's also less to go wrong. And see, that's a classic symptom of buying an S-Class or an E-Class when you have the air ride suspension. That's another common failure. We had an X5 diesel, and I love that car to the moon and back, but we had to do airbags, it seemed like every 2 or 3 years. Good for towing and gives you a more stable ride, but those air ride suspension systems fail. Same thing on the Mercedes-Benz. Air suspension leaks. It could cost you thousands of dollars to repair that. Don't forget, as they age, transmissions, other leaks start creeping up. The problem is the way a lot of the vehicles are packaged, they're very, very tightly built. And so a lot of those engines are hard to access components. Many people comment in the comments below. If you can't afford a brand new Mercedes, there's a high probability you may not be able to afford a used Mercedes. Or at least not without a pre-purchase inspection. See, if you're going to buy a used Mercedes-Benz, always, always, always get a pre-purchase inspection. Find out the trouble areas. Every car seems to have its nuance. Understand what those are. If the C-Class, there's areas. The PCV, has it been done? Understand the kind of service history it's had. Understand those ins and outs of that particular model. Make sure that the dealer does a pre-purchase inspection. Make sure all proper parts are replaced, that the service history looks good, it's used proper parts based on Mercedes-Benz, not aftermarket jobber parts, and that it's seen love, care, and attention. Make sure it also hasn't had accident history, because sometimes things don't get put back right, and then there's other problems. Not to mention devaluation of that vehicle because it's been in a collision. So if you can't afford a brand new Mercedes, that used one sure better be tip-top. The worst part is there's lots of owners that get into it and buy cheap Mercedes-Benz and don't do their homework. See, here's a classic example. A gentleman who paid $8,500 for a beautiful little E350 Blue Tech diesel. After a few short years and enjoying the great fuel economy in that 36 to 39 miles per gallon, there's a bunch of issues that popped up. How about things like the rear main seal? How about things like the oil cooler seals? How about the knock sensors, the EGR valves? Those are common problems that popped up. EGR pressure sensor, EGR cooler, extreme amounts of cost. So that $8,000-$9,000 Mercedes SUV now all of a sudden turned into a $24,000 money pit. You see how that turns? And that happens to way too many people. You know, as the mileage goes up, you will expect more expensive maintenance. How do Mercedes-Benz stack up against some of their stiff competition? Let's be honest, a Mercedes-Benz does feel a little bit nicer than most Lexus vehicles. It drives nicer, has better ergonomics, and certainly has the history. That being said, a Lexus is indisputable. The technology works, it's reliable, the drivetrains haven't really been all that problematic for the most part. Lexus is going to be a more reliable vehicle, but the driving experience usually comes down to the German cars. The German luxury cars are always going to cost you a lot more money in the long run. So you have to make a determination, what's your preference? The way they drive, they all have their own sort of unique feel and driving experience. A lot of the German cars tend to handle better. They usually have better performance. The cars from Lexus and Infiniti, often the fact that they're reliable, change the fluids, no unexpected big repairs. So clearly there's some great choices and some great options out there. But let's talk about some of those cost comparisons between a 5-year, a 10-year, and as well as a 10-year catastrophic rate probability between all of these brands. So why don't we start with the 5-year maintenance cost? First of all, let's start there with Infiniti. It looks to cost about $3,811. Lexus, $2,387. BMW hits you with about a $5,136 cost for 5 years of maintenance, and Mercedes-Benz is all the way up to about $4,227. So clearly Mercedes is almost double in a 5-year time frame of what a Lexus is. Some of it, of course, is maintenance that a lot of the German manufacturers would say that that's how you keep them running at tip top. They're designed and engineered to run very, very well to a high degree of performance within a very tight set of tolerances, and that's their justification in sending you to the service bay. Some of the cost we found we've been able to offset by a little DIY, and I'm able to do a little wrenching myself. Then as you move up to 10 years, it becomes much more telling, with of course Infiniti being about $11,878. Lexus now is only $7,130 in a 10-year time frame. BMW is $15,991. Audi is $10,213, and Mercedes-Benz is $12,962. So you have 13 grand for Mercedes-Benz versus the lowest cost being a Lexus at $7,100. You're about half of the cost from a Lexus as it is to own a Mercedes-Benz. But is it half the vehicle? Some would say a Lexus is a better built vehicle. Some say it's just a glorified Toyota. So it sort of depends on your perspective and your point of view. Lexus vehicles are wonderful, they're beautiful, but if you want a three-pointed star, it certainly has some clout. It becomes a conversation about your own personal taste and interest. But the bigger question that's more telling, what happens on the probability of failure? Because we know as these age, the chances of them failing and breaking go up, up, up. So as we look at that, Infiniti, the chance of a major catastrophic failure within 10 years time frame goes to about 33.22%. Lexus, 18.75%. So 1 in 5 might see a catastrophic failure. BMW, 47.11%. Audi, 31%. And a Mercedes-Benz is 41%. So while you're looking at a vehicle like a BMW, the probability of catastrophic failure is almost half, whereas a Mercedes-Benz is closer to 40%. So most would argue that Mercedes-Benz in a 10-year time frame far less likely to see a catastrophic failure than a BMW would. So what's my overall take, and would I buy another used Mercedes-Benz? For a while I was struggling, I was out of frustration. We had some problems with this vehicle, but things have sort of leveled out lately. And we love the vehicle, and honestly I don't mind paying the service costs, some of the maintenance. Whatever I can't fix myself, I take to the dealer and we pay the piper. Every trip in between the service network means that it's a fun drive and it's an enjoyable driving experience. And while it does cost more to own than a Lexus or a Toyota, we've always gravitated to some of these luxury brands built in Germany. A lot of these vehicles, Mercedes-Benz, BMW, we've really particularly loved. From my own personal perspective, many say the S-Class, E-Class are the way to go, GLE, GLS as well. But from my take is, if you want to reduce your costs, you want to enjoy the driving experience, you find that sweet spot somewhere in the C-Class because it's rear-wheel drive, it's not front-wheel drive. The GLA, the CLA are more entry-level and they feel it. They have dual clutch gearboxes, they're front-wheel drive, and they don't feel as refined. The C-Class is a nice blend. You also get in the GLC, which is the same chassis, same drivetrain, a great driving driving experience, one of the most popular and one of the most reliable products for Mercedes-Benz. We also think about the E-Class, S-Class. You have air ride, you have more complex systems. So if you enjoy those, that's absolutely amazing. But if you want to concern a little bit about keeping costs down, air ride is gone. Some of the other tech is just not there. Transmissions and the drivetrains quite often are a little simpler too. The base 2-liter turbo isn't necessarily my go-to. It's a popular drivetrain. The newer ones are better than you're finding in the first generation of the W205. There's some great choices out there. With all of that said, right there, you're going to check out, why are used Mercedes-Benz so cheap again? Yeah, you're checking the classifieds and you're finding such amazing deals. There are some strong reasons for it. Check out the video. It's going to share the whole story. Hope to see each and every one of you real soon, everybody. Catch you then. Bye-bye.